Today's podcast is brought to you by Kentucky Farm Bureau Insurance. When it comes to home and auto insurance, it's important to have the right coverage from a company and an agent you can trust. Someone who will help you properly protect the people and things you love the most. So if the unexpected happens, you and your family can rest insured. To request a free quote, find your local KFB insurance agent at mykfbagent.com. Kentucky Farm Bureau, big on commitment. Welcome to Kentucky Farm Bureau News, the podcast. I'm Tim Thornberry, editor of the Kentucky Farm Bureau News magazine. Our guest today, and it's quite an honor to have Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman and Agriculture Commissioner Jonathan Schell in the studio today to talk about agriculture education. Well, first off, thank you two for being here. It's a great honor to have a Lieutenant Governor here, an Ag Commissioner here. It's really a good moment for us, and we certainly appreciate it. And we're here today. We're going to talk about agriculture education and a new collaboration between the two of you. And if you would, tell us a little bit about it and how it got started, and we'll start with you, Lieutenant Governor.
Sure. So I'm happy to be here today, and thank you for having us. I'll start kind of from my perspective as the Lieutenant Governor. We've really been working on the idea of improving, expanding, and creating space for more ag education and thinking through how we can do that, because what we know is that, the number of farmers that we have in Kentucky are going down. And so my question was, how can we expand and broaden that base of people who have access to information and education that might lead them into this field? And so we really looked at the major groups, like you have your FFA, you have 4-H. Those kids typically, I was that kid, Jonathan, I'm sure you were too. Those kids typically grow up on farms. They typically have family farms. And so we wanted to think about ways we might be able to reach kids that don't grow up in those circumstances, right? And actually bring them into the fold. And so that's really kind of been our mission, thinking through how we can make this possible. That was kind of through the first term. And as you know, we had the pandemic and the tornadoes and the floods and all the things. And so when Commissioner Schell came into office, we just got to talking about how we can improve ag education to the point where we can make it available maybe to more kids than would have had access to it before. And so I'll let you take it from there, Commissioner.
Yeah, Tim, I'd like to give the Lieutenant Governor a lot more credit than she's taking right now, because whenever we first got into office, being a new constitutional officer, we were getting the office set up, we were doing transition, and she's been there for 4 years in her position. And so she reached out sometime in early January to me and wanted to have a meeting. I'm sure she did that with the rest of constitutional officers. If they didn't, then, too bad for them. But reached out, wanted to have a meeting, and, it was very gracious of her to do so, coming off of an election and getting in as we were trying to set up. And so whenever she asked for that, I tried to come up with, actionable items of ways that we could work together whenever we met. And a funny story with it, Lieutenant Governor, I don't even know if you know this, but whenever we first started putting that meeting together, the secretaries that were dealing with doing the scheduling kept wanting to have a neutral site, like it was some big problem. And so eventually they said, well, we'll meet at the Starbucks and by my office.
They knew you, I suppose.
That's right.
Well, and so I kept saying, I don't care. Like, I'll go to the Lieutenant Governor's office. It's fine. And I'm sure on her end, she was saying the same thing. But
yes,
they wanted it to be a neutral site, and so they set it up that way. Well, something happened, and they ended up moving it to Lieutenant Governor's office. And so the day we were supposed to meet, I show up at the Starbucks and had completely forgotten that we had moved it back to her office. And so I'm sitting there and I'm starting to get aggravated. I'm like, gosh, why isn't she here? She stood me up. And then finally my secretary texts me and she's like, why are you not at the Lieutenant Governor's office? And I said, oh, crap.
We made it work, though. We made it work.
So we rescheduled it. Whenever we went in, I had three main things that I wanted to talk to her about around education and agriculture. The first one was on our mobile science activity centers of how can we improve those and make those better because they're so in demand all across the state of Kentucky. Everybody wants them. and then the second one was, how can we better collaborate with the Department of Education through her office in order to help get more education grants for ag education through the department, particularly around sensory issues and kids that have special needs for those mobile science activity centers. And the last thing was something that she had been working on that I didn't know about around ag education and trying to get more of that into the elementary schools. And when I mentioned that, her eyes lit up. She was like, let's do it. And so we then started talking about, well, what does this need to look like? And she said, well, let me set up a meeting between me, you, and the new commissioner of education, Robbie Fletcher. And so we had that meeting, and it went great. Everybody was so excited. Everybody was bought in. And after that first meeting, the marching orders were, let's get it done. And I give the lieutenant governor a lot of credit for that.
Well, I'm certainly glad you didn't mess it up by not showing up for that first meeting.
Yeah.
I was just mad he didn't bring me any Starbucks.
Listen, I know education is certainly very important to the two of you, and it's been a big, important part of your life. Talk to me for a minute about the importance of that connection in such an initiative, the education piece. We talk all the time about how important it is to educate a sector out there that's not familiar with the farm, so they sort of know what we're doing. But especially with our next generation, how important is that component to this initiative?
Well, I'll say this. As somebody who grew up, I grew up in Bergen, so, we have 1,000 people and a 4-way stop, and that's it. And Jonathan actually grew up close by. And the commissioner of education is from Lawrence County. And so when you got folks who grew up in rural Kentucky and who understand the importance of this type of education and making sure every kid has access to it, that's when these things like this are able to happen. But I'll be honest with you. As somebody who grew up in a small town on a farm, it is a foreign concept to me that some of these kids don't know. They've never experienced it. That it's something that is not part of their life. And so thinking about how we can have them, touch a farm and to have experience in a place that they've never been, with things that they've never really had as part of their life, and what doors that opens for them, especially when you think about how diversified the ag community really is. When you look at it from an education standpoint, you're talking about science, you're talking about technology, you could be talking about ag policy, right? There's just so many things that you can weave into this that would also be a real big help to our teachers and our education system as they think about how to create more hands-on activities and more real-life experiences, right? This will be a big help to them as we work to do that.
Yeah, and Tim, as we all know in this room, education is the great equalizer. No matter where you came from, whether it's a poor inner city of Louisville or whether it's poor Appalachia or whether you're from a very wealthy side of Oldham County or somewhere's over in Bourbon. It's the great equalizer. It helps bring people up to a level to where that everybody can succeed and give them an opportunity. And that's the reason education is so important, period. Education is important. And, I was very fortunate to have the education that I've got, had great teachers in Garrett County, went through the school system, got a degree from EKU. But what we're trying to build here is beyond structural education to being lifelong learners, to be lifelong people who are trying to get educated on the issues that they're seeing, because it's not enough just to give them the resources in a school setting to know that what a cow looks like, but to actually be able to take that and use it later on in their life. And that's what this is really about, is trying to set these students up for success. And I told the lieutenant governor this. Kristen Wright was in our meeting with Robbie Fletcher, and she used to be the ag educator, the FFA advisor at Seneca in Louisville. She's now the FFA advisor for the state FFA organization. And she said that we've gone beyond kids not knowing where their food comes from. When she would bring in elementary school kids from Louisville to Seneca for, let's say, a petting zoo, they didn't even know what a cow looked like. We've gone beyond not knowing where your food comes from to not even being able to recognize what these animals are. So this is why this is so important. And it's at the best time that you can possibly have it. As the lieutenant governor said whenever we first started, we're losing farmland, we're losing farmers. And so it's something that we have to do more of in agriculture in order to educate the future so that we can get more people involved. My Deputy Ag Commissioner, Warren Beeler, says all the time, we need everything. We need more of everything in agriculture. We need geneticists. We need marketers. We need communicators. We need all of the things every other industry has, and we need it now.
We need podcast hosts.
That's right.
Well, hey, I'm here for you. I remember when my kids were growing up, maybe the biggest thing that would happen in their school at an elementary age is you got to go to the local pumpkin patch,
right,
and pick out a pumpkin. And that was maybe the extent of it. That's maybe all they ever saw about a farm. And
well, now, Tim, let's not undersell the importance of pumpkins. As a pumpkin farmer myself,
by the way,
let's not diminish our pumpkin farmers.
Never. By the way, in our next magazine, we talk a whole lot about pumpkins, as you know, and the Down the Back Roads, not to give it away, begins with pumpkins. That's all I'll say about that. So we love the pumpkin patch, but it's sort of like when the survey was done a few years ago, and people, not just kids, but adults, thought that chocolate milk came from brown cows. I mean,
I cannot believe
or one of my favorite ham breakfast videos was the kids telling where a ham comes from. That was so good.
And they were very authentic. I'm telling you, none of that was planned. I'll tell you, it was something. But at this age, elementary age, how important is it to start there and sort of plant that seed?
Yeah. So the reason that I think the Lieutenant Governor and I are so focused on trying to get agriculture in elementary schools is because, one, we don't have it there now. We have a few schools throughout the state. And I actually went to Frankfort Independent down at 2nd Street School this past week to sign a farm-to-school proclamation because it's Farm-to-School Month in Kentucky in October. And they're doing some really amazing things. We have some schools across the state that are doing some really innovative things. Creekside in Hardin County has the only that I know of dedicated ag education in an elementary school where all students go through there once a week. But the reason I think it's so important for elementary is it's the same thing as like Little League sports. If you're going to have a great high school team, you've got to have a good elementary. You've got to have a good feeder program in order to get them in. And that's exactly what we have to have in agriculture. It's just basics. It's just common sense. If you're teaching these kids at a younger age, they're getting bought in. They're understanding. They're knowing that corn doesn't come from a can. It comes from a farmer. They're seeing the excitement to be able to get their hands in the dirt and do the things. And I'll tell you, with behavioral issues in schools, this is one way to be able to help with that as well, because some of your students that may be more energetic and wound up, you get them in the dirt, let them start planting, and all of a sudden you're seeing a whole new kid.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. And I actually have a story about that. When I was an assistant principal at Nelson County, we had a student who being in a desk in a classroom was not his thing. And he was constantly in my office with discipline issues and things like that. Well, one day we had a community service day where we went out and we landscaped at the school. I'm here to tell you that nobody worked harder than that young man. Yep. He was the star of the show that day, and the other teachers couldn't believe it. And so it just kind of goes to show that everybody has a gift, and it can be realized in a lot of different ways. When I think about elementary kids, exactly what the commissioner just said is true, which is the earlier you get students interested in something, aware of their surroundings, the better it's going to be in the long run. But I also think about how much this will support our elementary schools from a curriculum standpoint. They're all looking at now project-based learning, and how can you infuse some cross-curricular topics together to knock out a bunch of, standards and to be able to cover a lot of ground. And the ag education is an amazing way to do that. Now, we may have some elementary school teachers who were in FFA or who, went through ag programs, but they're not certified to teach ag education the way that our high school teachers are, right? So being able to help them with ideas, with with ways that they can innovate by providing resources and some guidelines and things like that. Teachers love that stuff, right? They're always looking for new ideas and way to do things better. And so by helping elementary school teachers who may not have a background in ag education think about their own subject matter differently, now their students are going to think about it differently too.
Yeah. When we were at the 2nd Street School this past week to talk a little bit about what the Lieutenant Governor just said, the teacher who was there had put together her own materials. She had went online, she had gotten in Photoshop or whatever program she used, and she created a lesson plan for herself. She didn't have help. She went and did it herself, and it was on lettuce that day. She was teaching about lettuce. They made sweet potato quesadillas and salsa. Just outside the box stuff. There was things that they had grown in their garden at the school that they were trying to use. And she had created this whole content herself and was working through that. What we want to do is to help provide those resources to where that instead of her having to take an entire weekend away from her family, figuring out how to put this together, that she can go on the website, she can go online, she can go somewhere to be able to get that content to be able to use in the school to where that it's laid out in a very professional way, the way that the rest of their curriculum would be.
Yeah, and I'll say this too. Commissioner made a great point when we were meeting with the Commissioner of Education too. He said, this is not something else to put on a teacher's plate. This is not another requirement. This is not another mandate. This is an opportunity, right? This is where people can pick and choose, and really we're helping to provide these resources and opportunities so that teachers can make it what they want it to be.
If I could interject a couple of stories here. One thing Farm Bureau does, throughout the summer, they hold teacher workshops.
Right.
Very
and
important.
have for many years. And I've sat through some of those, and they're always full. And the teachers are like children themselves when they get in these different environments and they're seeing some of the things that they can learn themselves or take back to their classrooms. They get really excited about that. And so I think that's obviously great. It's something education probably covers the biggest part of our policy book at Farm Bureau. So it's very important to us. And those teacher workshops have just been phenomenal through the years. The other thing is, in another world, in another life, I worked for the Department of Education and primarily worked with career and technical education programs. And found that, a lot of students that maybe they were kinesthetic learners. They, sitting in a classroom listening to a lecture or something, maybe, and I was one of them, was not my thing. But when you got them out into a hands-on learning environment, they really excelled and did things way beyond maybe what anybody thought they would do. And I think agriculture education is a big part of that. And it's exciting for me to see you guys talking about bringing it to the elementary level, because in my career, it was mostly high school kids.
Right.
And we had a few middle school programs that were beginning to pop up through FFA and things like that, but not many. So I would assume, and we mentioned this before, you'd like to plant a seed with this initiative for these young people, whether they want to be on the farm or in some ag-related capacity. Is that a good way to look at it?
Absolutely. And that's the thing that we need to help people realize is that you don't have to be a farmer to be in agriculture. It's not just plows, cows, and sows. There are so many opportunities in agriculture beyond what it used to be. And everything that you do, there's not a degree that I can think of that you can go to in college and not utilize that for agriculture. We need ag attorneys. We need ag doctors. We need rural healthcare providers that specialize to help our farmers out. We need ag marketers. We need ag communicators. We need ag newscasters. We need ag everything. And that's what we are hopeful to help realize for these students as they go through the process, K through 5 and then beyond, is to help them realize that everything has to do with agriculture, and there's a place for you in that. You are needed in agriculture.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Commissioner. And I too think about, when I would work with kids. Now I taught high school. I was scared of the little ones, That's what I taught high school kids. But some things that I did had to do with I taught government, and so I would partner with the biology teachers, ag science teachers. We would come up with a project, and they would do the ag component. And then in my class, we would work on ag policy, right? So you figured out how to solve this problem. How are you going to bring it to life, right? So there's just so much crossover, and exactly like Commissioner Shell just said, you don't have to live on a 200-acre farm to be a farmer,
right?
And to understand just the basic tenets of nutrition, being a good tenant of the earth, right? All of those skills, all of those areas, our students will benefit from, whether they go into, an area that might lead them directly into agriculture, like he just mentioned, or not, right?
Yep.
But just broadening that base and opening this door so that our students now understand, where their food comes from, how all of these things work. Kentucky's ag economy. I mean, my goodness, right? Just to be able to know more about that. If they choose to go into a field, that's great, because they probably wouldn't have had access to that knowledge beforehand. But even if they don't, just understanding and having that realization about how it all comes together. I don't think there's a better subject for our students to be able to do that with than agriculture and education.
Yeah, I agree. And just to emphasize what she just said on the nutrition side of this, it can't be understated the importance of teaching these kids about nutrition, because, you all have seen it the same as I have. Our nutrition is declining in this country. We talk about hunger a lot, but most of that hunger is not because they're not eating something. It's because they're not eating the right things. And I look at this opportunity that we're working on right now with ag education as an economic development opportunity as well, because if we get these kids young enough to understand what their nutrition looks like, to where that they start to want to eat bell peppers and cucumbers, and they want to eat lean meats and chicken and burger, and they want to eat pork and the things that we grow here in Kentucky, they're going to grow up to be adults that are going to the grocery store and to the restaurants buying those things. And so this is an economic development opportunity at the same time to be able to educate these kids on where their nutrition comes from, and that it is healthier to eat more local, to be able to get it from your farmer, knowing your farmer and who they are. And that was one of the things that they did at 2nd Street, was that lesson that they were teaching on agriculture was about nutrition and how healthy those foods were and what they did for your body.
Probably a side benefit from this is, as those children grow, they will also become advocates
Absolutely.
for agriculture and for the industry, which is something that we certainly see right now as we're in the midst, and I say midst, but we've been trying to get a farm bill passed. And advocacy is so important when it comes to something like that, helping people to understand that food is something for all of us. It's a priority for all of us. And so I see that, that was, as we were just talking, the word advocate kept coming back to my mind. We're very fortunate to live in a state where we have government leaders and legislative people who are in tune, for the most part, to the farm. It's a very bipartisan subject, and that's really has to be a great advantage to you as we begin this initiative and we get further into it, knowing that you've got support from both sides of the aisle for this.
Yeah, when it comes to both agriculture and education, those are and should be and should remain nonpartisan issues, right? Not even bipartisan, nonpartisan. I think about, the opportunity that this provides us to come to the table and find areas where we agree and build relationships in places where there may not have been. Which may allow us to come together to work on something else down the road, right? And it really is one of those opportunities that opens the door, for us as adults working in state government, to be able to be an example. Right now, I think a lot of folks look at government and politics, and they see it as maybe a requirement to like pick winners and losers, right? And that should never be what we're doing. We should all be looking at yes and answers and coming together to figure out how to solve problems. And, when it comes to agriculture, Kentucky's economy absolutely depends upon it. And I've always said the future of Kentucky's economy is in our classrooms today. So what better crossroad for us to come together on than something like this?
I agree, 100%.
Yeah, I think this is what people expect out of government. It's not what they get a lot of times, but this is what people expect. Elections are one thing. You got to pick sides. I mean, you're going to vote one way or the other. You can't go in and vote for all the above. But when the elections are over, this is when you come together and do the work on behalf of the people. This is what I think is expected of government leaders. I mean, you can have disagreements on certain policies that you're passionate about, but there are issues that you need to come together on. And education and agriculture, like the Lieutenant Governor said, is exactly those two issues. And I'm very, very grateful for how gracious she has been in this process. And the thing that I look at in my position as being ag commissioner, I'm not education commissioner, I'm ag commissioner. And so we have to find partners in the education realm, and she's been a great partner to be able to do that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Speaking of partnerships, here we are at Farm Bureau today, and I know that in what we do on a daily basis, it's important for us when we're working with our commodity groups or other organizations, folks in government. Those partnerships are critical to what we do and all the initiatives. I would assume the same is important for this initiative, to have those partners, to have those folks that really understand it and buy into it and support it.
Right. And when we first started talking about ag education, we've talked about the importance of relying on the experts, right? Relying on the commodity groups, relying on Kentucky Farm Bureau, all of those organizations that do this for a living. But we don't want it to get stuck there, right? We want to make sure that we're broadening that base and we're using those experts to go into places where otherwise ag education maybe wouldn't be happening, or certainly wouldn't be happening to the extent it could with partners involved. And so we want to continue to make sure that all of those organizations stay really tuned in to this project and this work. We just want to make sure that we get it outside of, like, for example, you said a lot of the work that you did was with the CTE, like in the career pathways in high school, which is great. But at an elementary school level, they don't have that. And so let's figure out how we can broaden that out to places where it doesn't currently exist, still relying on the expertise of the folks in the field.
Yeah, I don't have a bigger partner than Farm Bureau in the position that I have. I'm very grateful for you all and what you do, Eddie Melton and the entire team. The moment that I mentioned this to Eddie, he was like, let's figure it out. And I don't know if you reached out to them or if they reached out to you, but it was almost immediate after we had our meeting. Because, I keep Eddie and the team updated on a lot of the stuff that we're doing because they are the biggest partner that we have in Kentucky. They're the voice for rural Kentucky. They're the voice for agriculture. And you all speak with 500,000+ members in this state. And so I keep Eddie and the team pretty apprised of what we're doing. And the moment we started talking about this, he recognized this as being a winter issue. This is something that we have to do. But as far as partners go and reaching out into places where we may not normally get it, what I've noticed in this position over the last 10 months in going around to the different schools that have ag education programs is, and this is why it's so important for the education department to get so bought into this, to have Commissioner Fletcher so bought in, is because what I've noticed is that whenever the administration's bought in locally, it happens. Whenever you've got a superintendent, a school board, principals that are bought into a program like this, it's going to happen. And that's the same thing with an initiative like this when you're trying to take it statewide, of creating a statewide initiative for ag education in elementary schools, is that if the administration's bought into it, if the ag education commissioner and the staff that's there is bought in, they'll figure out a way to help make this happen. And that's what we're here to do, Lieutenant Governor and I, is to put a focus on this and show that it can be done. It doesn't have to be difficult. It doesn't have to be another burden. It doesn't have to be a mandate on anybody. There's enough partners in this state to get this done and to get it done the right way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What are the next steps now? I know that you've talked to the women's committee here, and we're getting this ball rolling. What do we see happening next?
Well, I think one of the things we talked about, and this kind of organically came up in our meeting together with Commissioner Fletcher in education was how, what about a week maybe in the spring where we can highlight ag education in elementary schools, right? Do a proclamation, call it the, Elementary Ag Education Week in Kentucky, and between now and then, really cultivate those resources, programming opportunities, and get it out the door so that teachers can plan to do some things that maybe go along with that theme in their school system if they're able. That may be a really good way for us as we think through this to really lift it up and highlight it and kind of be like a jump start to kind of open the door for teachers to find those resources, pull them all together, and see what it looks like in real life on the ground.
Yeah, and I think that's the goal for this next year's an Ag Education Week for all of Kentucky. And our staffs have had a meeting so far. We've had one come together meeting. So Education Cabinet and their consultants had been working towards how do they come up with different curriculums and standards and all the things that go along with that I don't understand. And then my team had been working on, what does it more practically look like for ag education? And my director of education and outreach was a former ag teacher at Seneca as well with Kristen. And so, kind of the things that I think would be really intriguing and interesting to have in this, just if we can talk about like theoreticals, what ifs of what this could be, is having ag education in all subjects that week. So let's just take 1 week out of the year that they're in school. And if you're teaching math this week, you're going to be teaching ag math. 1 chicken, 2 chickens equals 3 chickens kind of thing if it's real elementary. Or we can go all the way up to 5th grade with volumetrics and how much corn's in a grain bin. You can use agriculture for all kinds of different math, science, reading, social studies. How did the world get started? And it was because when we were able to specialize around agriculture, cities were created. And there's a lot of things that you can teach based around agriculture for all subjects that we have. Another couple of the things that we've kind of batted around is how do you get kids to understand and know more about the animals? And so having like mystery things throughout the week to where that they have to guess and answer certain questions, and then engaging them around careers of maybe mystery ag careers to where, you've got a drone pilot or you've got an ag mechanic or other things that are beyond just the cow, sows, and plows and being a farmer. And then having real ag experiences sometime during the week. My hope and my goal is that, we're building out to where that a school can take a visit to a farm. They can go to a corn maze and a pumpkin patch in the fall, or if we're in the spring, maybe they can go ride a combine or see somebody drive a combine, or not combine, but a planter in the spring, and kind of take it in a spring and fall type of atmosphere potentially to see where this goes. We've got plant, and then we've got harvest, and kind of showing them both sides of the skid, and then. One of the other neat things that we've kind of conceptually thought about is how do we engage them in more advocacy like you're talking about? And so having letters to farmers saying thank you, talking about the different things that are out there, cool. Letting kids put them together, draw a little few things. And then how do we bring community service involved in this? How do we get them beyond just thinking about myself to thinking about community? And so having something to where that they can harvest from home, harvest a skill, harvest a resource, harvest time, in some way for a community project or something that them individually puts together or a classroom setting. And then one of the things that I think I'm most excited about that we've talked about, if it comes to fruition, and these are all theoretical ideas, just opportunities that may be here. It's not set in stone in any way. But some of the things that we've started thinking about is what would it look like to have a panel? And on that panel, you'd have like a Caroline Groth, who's the former state FFA president going up for national officer, to ask questions of a farmer. And so then that farmer, and this would be broadcast virtually to all schools in some way, YouTube link, whatever it is. And then you'd ask that farmer, well, how do you get started farming? Like, how do you buy land? And then in pops on the panel, you'd have a realtor and an ag credit lender so that they could talk about this and how it actually practically works. And then you'd have, talking about, well, if I decided to grow pumpkins, how would I do it? I don't know anything about pumpkins. So then in pops a UK extension expert on pumpkins to talk about, UK extension and what it looks like. And then they'd ask more questions, and then it'd be an ag dealer, a seed dealer, a fertilized dealer, different things that are there. And then they would say, well, what happens if something goes wrong? And, there's a policy that comes down from Washington or Frankfurt that I don't like. And then in pops Eddie Melton, and he talks about advocacy and how important it is. And so having these types of making it fun, that's the thing that I want this to be, is something that's fun, for these kids to really be able to connect to it and see to expand their mindset and where they are. But Tim, I don't know if you can tell or not, but I'm pretty jacked up about it. Lieutenant Governor's pretty jacked up about it.
We are.
And so I don't know how this fails at this point. It's going to happen, and it's going to be something special that I think we're going to see longevity for the future.
You know, I knew you'd get pumpkins in one more time.
It's fall.
I just knew that would happen. I got to tell you, I love doing these things, even though I tell these guys over there on the other side of the window that I have a face for radio and a voice.
No disagreement here,
and
Tim.
a voice for print. But I have spent all weekend excited about this, thinking, boy, if I don't mess this up, you know. And it's just been exciting to think about it. And I hear and see the excitement in both of you. This is a really exciting time for you, isn't it?
It really is. Yep. It really is. I'm so excited about what this could be. I'm so excited about the opportunity that we're going to provide to schools and teachers that they've never had before. And ultimately, obviously, our goal is to, provide this opportunity to the next generation of Kentuckians. And we can really, there can be some really positive change that comes from this, where we open the door and our kids have more opportunities than they've ever had before, right in their backyard.
Absolutely. I couldn't have said it better.
I know Farm Bureau is excited too, and I can't thank you both enough for being here today. It's been a great honor for me to have you here, and somebody's got to have a camera around here so I can get a picture. So,
all right.
Tim,
anyway.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor,
yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, too. Yep. This is great.
Thanks a lot. Our thanks again to Lieutenant Governor Jacqueline Coleman and to our Ag Commissioner Jonathan Schell for joining us today, talking about a great new initiative, a collaboration between the two of them. We're very excited about it, and I hope you enjoy this podcast. And for all the Kentucky Farm Life podcast, you can log on to your favorite podcasting platforms.